This webinar presents research conducted at the SWPS University, Poland, as part of Work Package 2, Society and Culture of the European Union's Horizon Europe research grant entitled China Horizons, Dealing with the Resurgent China. Joining me here online are members of the SWPS University research team. Let me introduce them shortly to you. First of all, Professor Dorota Ilczuk. She is an economist, culture researcher, and a scholar specializing in the creative economy. At the SWPS University, she is head of the Creative Economy Research Center. Dorota, welcome.
Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. And we have also with us Tamara Kamińska. She is PhD candidate conducting research in creative economy with Professor Ilczuk, but she's also director of Music Export Poland, a very important institution, and I hope Tamara will be able to tell us a little bit about what she's doing in that institution. And she's advisor to the board of the Society of Authors, ZAIX, and she's coordinator of the European Music Exporters Exchange Network. Tamara, great to have you here with us.
Hello, good afternoon. Very nice joining you.
All right, so we have everyone on board. And first of all, before we start, very, very short household rules. We'll try to keep within the 60 minutes of the webinar. And I would like to invite all people who are watching us live to post any questions you might have using YouTube chat function. And we will try to respond to these questions as we go, or maybe leave them until the end. But it will be great to also hear from you. And if we don't hear from you, we have lots of other things that we'll be talking about, but it will be great to have some interaction. First of all, I think it will be good for me to start with a very broad introduction into the whole field. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Marcin Jacobi, and I'm a sinologist. So I have the sinological China studies background, and we try to combine knowledge of China with knowledge of cultural sector, creative industries, and very practical knowledge of how things are going in that area. Now, I think speaking about the sector now in China, we have to remember about the history. And I will not say maybe too long, but a few sort of images that might help us get a context of what we'll be talking about today. Well, first of all, there are different ways of looking at 20th century history of Chinese cultural sector. There is a researcher in China called Hu Huilin who proposes a sort of economic view. So according to him, you have 4 periods. First, until 1956, it's a period of all cultural enterprises being nationalized. Now, the period between 57 and 78 is a period of ideological focus. Of course, this includes the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 1976. And then the years 1978 to the years 2000 is the transition period towards market economy. And according to this researcher, the years starting from the accession of China to World Trade Organization in 2001, this is a time of the full establishment of market economy policies. Now, this is one view of things, but we can have another view, for example, looking more from the sort of a political narrative. So first, we have the period of very close cooperation between China and the Soviet Union. We have Soviet experts teaching Chinese communists about how to manage cultural institutions. And the whole system is very similar to the Soviet system until 1960 and the Sino-Soviet split. And then from early 1960s until 1978, it's a period of indigenous adaptation of this Soviet model. So it's also very strongly ideologically driven, total state control of the narratives, and some innovation within this very closed system. And then from 1979 to 1989, at the decade of unprecedented policy liberalization, opening up to different views, different influences from Europe, from the West, from the whole world. And of course, 1989 here is a time where everything changes. So from 1990s until 2012, this is the time of this growing commercialization and marketization of culture that we'll be focusing on especially strongly today. And of course, the last period, the period that we have in focus are the years from 2012 until today, the Xi Jinping era, where many of the changes are being continued, but there are some new influences, new changes that make us how shall I put it? I think it's quite a growingly difficult area to do research on. And we'll be talking a little bit about this because China is getting a little bit less translucent, transparent. There is less and less data available, and it's quite difficult for us to grasp what is the direction of some of the changes that are happening in the field of culture. But we'll be focusing on that in a second. That was just by means of a short introduction. And Dorota, I will pass over to you, and maybe you can tell us a few words about the whole idea for the research that we've been conducting and where we are in the research.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, for this short but very intensive, rich, interesting introduction. I hope that everybody knows who is sinologist in this group, and as I'm not, and as I'm economist, first of all, and also expert in cultural policies analysis, I decided to use a tool which is quite well known for me to understand the cultural sector in China. For achieving this goal, which is understanding, at least understanding something like the essence of organization, financing, and all those extremely fascinating facts for all economists all over the world about China, I decided to use a tool which is very well verified by cultural policy researchers in Europe. But for this, I would love to share my screen now and to show you PowerPoint presentation. This is the title, and this is exactly what we've decided to do. We tried to look at something and to analyze, trying the whole time not to forget that we are bloody European researchers, but trying to use the potential of our knowledge coming from the international expertise. First of all, on the first slide, you can see how do we define cultural policies. This is extremely important to understand that we are not having in mind something which is done by some organizations within the sector, cultural sector or creative sector in different countries. Not at all. What we do understand by cultural policies is something which is done by central and local governments in the field of culture and its industries. This is quite important to underline that this is culture and its industries, because we are very close to the concept of CCS, which is creative and cultural sector. And this concept is also very well recognized in China. So we feel that we can understand the nature and the specifics of this CCS quite precisely. This intervention of central and local government should be intentional and systematic. It can't be anything like ad hoc action made in 1 year, then nothing like any repetition in future. Of course, that state interventionism can be very different in different countries. It can be very close to neoliberal approach, where sometimes some people say, like Brits, for example, that cultural policies in my country is not to have any cultural policies. But sometimes is a concept that we need state really extremely welfare, and we need welfare, and by this welfare we understand presence of a lot of solid funding in culture. The goals and principles and priorities of cultural policies can be different in different countries, following the rule of subsidiarity. Marcin asked me to also comment sometimes on different concepts, and I would like to tell now that it is very important that when we are analyzing cultural policies in different countries, we have to respect their own right to define how they want to use the concept of cultural policies. The different approaches allow us to understand and also to appreciate the right to do it. I think that it can help all of us not to be very soon too critical, not to be very soon to not to make very simple judgment about different systems, because some systems can be linked together with historical background, social background, and political background, of course. So, what kind of a tool we've decided to use? It was our entry point. It was nothing like that we were using just the way how cultural policies are monitored and analyzed in different European countries, using the grid or proposal how to do it by cultural policies, European cultural policies net. It is now very settled and having long, more than 20 years tradition project, the Compendium of Cultural Policies and Trends, very well situated now. First, it was impulse coming from Council of Europe to start to gather different profiles of cultural policies in different European countries. Then this project grew up, and now we are having 48 countries, and not only from Europe, which are putting their profiles and updating, which is extremely important, those profiles annually, meeting also annually in different places of the world.
Dorota, if I may add,
yes,
what we discovered very early on, before we started the research, was that China doesn't really have any country profile. So being such an important country as it is, nobody before actually tried, even attempted to create a sort of more or less full country profile of China. So this is probably the first research in this direction.
It is, in fact, we should be very proud of this, that we can be a pioneer in this aspect, but there were some Asian countries also trying to approach this methodology, quite successful, but still, even if it was positively validated in Asian countries, there was a big gap because China was not included. Thank you very much for this question, and I'm really sorry because I didn't mention that I'm very open to all the questions coming from you, and comments coming from Tamara, and questions and additions. Of course, I will be asking also Tamara to present some issues of our research, but in fact, the three of us are the major authors of the research I'm talking about now. So, what questions do we want to find to answer to? First, just simple question, how the People's Republic of China shapes its cultural policies. Is it really coming from the state and that's it? Or is it based, maybe in my naive believing, sometimes as a grassroots initiative? Or is it very market-oriented and only market forces are implementing it? Also, the second question you can see on the screen here is really targeted at the reality of China. We wanted to find how the mix of harsh market rules and politicization of administration and management processes affect the formation of the country's cultural policy. Here, we are slightly subjective in asking this question, but on the other hand, we've learned a lot, thanks to Marcin, for example, and other, no, thanks to Marcin first of all, thanks to Marcin, we know a lot. So sometimes we couldn't be so naive in asking our research questions. And the third question is to show that, of course, that we are having our European researchers' perspective. But on the other hand, we have experience with dealing with different country profiles. I really was involved in assessment of many emerging many new democratic countries and on building cultural policies by them. And suddenly we've discovered many similarities, for example, between new democratic countries in Europe and new democratic countries in South America, like Chile. So sometimes we can say that there are so many similar mechanisms and reactions how the cultural policies are built that it's very good to have this common knowledge about it.
Dorota, on that note, I would also add one thing. I think it's much easier for us in Poland or in Eastern Europe to relate to the way the cultural system is built in China, because we have the experiences of the socialist or communist states, and some of the things are really similar. So for us, some of the things that we'll be talking about today are not such a big surprise as they might be for other people.
Yes, so, exactly. We are not surprised because we are familiar. And for me, the most appealing issue will be to show what we really achieved trying to write organigram, how the organization and how the governance of the cultural life looks like in China. So I think that with organigram, for example, so this is really very easy to understand and to feel that we are like in old house or in old home, only for people who used to live in planned economy systems, so in post-Soviet countries. Using some of grid coming from compendium, but I'm trying to underline that we are just trying to use a compendium grid as an entry point, not a total. We didn't follow the total grid and the total expectations coming from the compendium. We succeeded with creating text covering cultural policy system, domestic governance system, cultural and creative sectors, especially institutional landscape, international cooperation, public actors, and cultural diplomacy, copyright on intellectual property protection, cultural participation and consumption, and some pieces on financing and public support, about which we feel quite proud because we are trying also to have to have our articles on it published. Now we will share some key findings which are really quite general, but of course, in a way, they are very new because they are organized in a very clear and, according to me, clear and proper way, how in different countries also we are trying to show the reality of cultural policies.
If maybe I can jump in here and just say that their key findings means that we are sharing some parts of our research, encouraging you to read the full text whenever it's available. We will definitely share this news on our social media of the project, but definitely we want to also give you a context. So key findings mean that you see like a very basic outlines and very basic information and main things that we discover as amusing sometimes, despite what Marcin is saying, that we are, to some extent, we are prepared on what we are facing with, but still we are adding some additional comments to that. So we highly encourage you to follow us also, to follow the project on social media, especially LinkedIn, making sure that whenever text is publicly available, you are the first ones to read it. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much for this. Really, this is exactly what I wanted to say, saying about key findings, because here we couldn't just put everything and we can't share with you on everything. Maybe much more on everything which really is striking us or is written in a bold letters. In fact, I asked Tamara to prepare presentation with bold letters to share with you that we are just concentrating on some sentences. When Marcin was talking about amalgamate or mix between rules which were typical for planned economy, really subordinated to the single party rule and strong market-oriented approach, it is extremely typical for China. And I think that it is quite well known for people. It is not very good to be born curator, performer, and to be involved in cultural sector in Chinese system, because it's quite hard. On one hand, there are many influences coming from the single party. There are many public institutions, and there are many market-based expectations from creators, performers, and those who are producers of cultural goods and services. So this is quite important to stress the duality of the Chinese system. On one hand, we have dual understanding between market reality and planned economy, which sometimes in a very easy way we can call socialist economy, but in fact it is just planned economy, typical for Soviet systems. But also we have here duality in constant push and pull between the ways and means of top-down governance with Chinese characteristics and market economy, entrepreneur policies and approaches. So now this is something which we are really proud of, and I would like to say that here my compliments are coming to Marcin, who tried to do his best and together with Tamara prepare the first which I had chance to look at, and I think that Chinese people also can have a first time for being familiar with our graphic interpretation of governance in the cultural sector in People's Republic of China. For everybody living in post-communist country, it is quite clear this kind of duality where on one hand we are having a government and different layers of government coming, of course, from the central government towards provincial, towards I would like to make it bigger to show you how it looks. No, I can't do it, but no, I can't do it, sorry. But I do hope that we can share our presentation or in our texts, like Tamara said, you can see our organigram, and to see that we are just on the left part of this page, we are showing different tiers of government coming from central government represented by Ministry of Culture and Tourism, then going to another level, and this is quite surprising for me as researcher of those systems, that there is nothing like a clear division between the level of provinces and the level of local municipalities. Here it is quite unclear, and I must say that presented by us, presented separately, but there were many discussions how to do it, because we don't see anything like a clear division between the different tiers of local governments in China. On the other hand, on the organigram, we are having party with its influential role on different institutions, starting from the Ministry of Culture, then on different institutions like other ministries who are in charge of culture in China, and then also provincial and county districts and township publicity department levels, different levels of party representatives who are in charge of having a sort of, let's say, not organizational power and supervision, but something like the typical influential role, sending the directions and directives and expectations how the system should be organized and how the decisions should be made. Going to the next slide, we are writing about culture and creative sectors, institutional landscape. Here, public institutions in the field of culture are in quite difficult position, because they are receiving basic budgets and are really strongly suggested to generate profit through various market activities. As I mentioned, it is not very easy to be public institution or public organization on such a market, but it is nothing so much unusual when you are looking at systems of organization of cultural life, for example, in very market-oriented countries like states, for example. It is simply very normal that apart from a group of non-profit sector organizations, there are many market-oriented organizations following the market rules. Of course, we should all understand that the cultural organizations and dealing with market of government mechanism are always having something like a difficult situation. On one hand, they are dealing with market failure, coming to commercialization, or disappearing some parts of cultural activities from the market at all, because they are becoming too expensive, or because they are becoming not interesting for producers to be provided. Or we are dealing with government failure, which is just politicization of the process and making all people who are decision makers coming from the governments really oriented only on the expectation of the average voter. It is a sort of failure which can be met in different countries, not only in China. Here,
I think we can also maybe add to the previous slide that what is also very important is that in China, we are facing now a lot of initiatives that are supposed to make culture more inclusive. So plenty of initiatives are undertaken to make sure that inhabitants, they have an access to culture. So it's even more dual. So I guess that duality might be the word of today, as we've mentioned it a few times already, especially that this cultural activities, this cultural events, they should be distributed for free. So most of them, they are free of charge, and inhabitants, citizens, they can just easily come to the venues, come to cultural institutions, making sure that the spot will be waiting for them. So even more pressure on that, because on one hand, you must perform economically, and on the other, still there is plenty of free initiatives that must be organized and must be provided by different organizations. So I feel that maybe that's also even adding an additional layer to this duality. So
yeah, I might also add another layer to make it even more difficult, that also cultural institutions have a mission of sort of moral upbringing of the society. So they need to produce content that the party views as educational content for the recipients. So they need to earn money. They need to do the project that the government wants them to do for free. And they also need to have content which fulfills all the propaganda sort of points. So this really makes things very, very demanding. And it's a very competitive market with public institutions, private organizations, everybody trying to sell the tickets, find recipients, find the viewers. So it makes life very hard, as Dorota said.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but also I would like to, sorry. Yes, go on.
Yeah, that's the discussion's becoming more vibrant. Well, of course, that's true that it makes it more competitive. But what I find very interesting is that China sees cultural sector not in a vacuum, as we tend to do in Europe for a long time. So they recognize culture as a part of bigger ecosystem. So very often culture is mixed with tourism, with gastronomy, with other branches of economy, which really seems to be very modern and forward-thinking, which we are really still struggle in Europe. There are some countries, not calling them by name, although some are coming to my mind, that we do not get this point. And that seems to be very modern and very interesting. That, yes, of course, it put a lot of pressure, but still it's the way of things that they should be. We are not operating in a vacuum, and it's impossible to think about culture as in a silos way. So even the fact that in a 5 years plan, there is very clearly indicated that culture should be a part of a bigger picture. That's really very interesting and modern approach, I would say.
Yeah, and it's actually not new, because already in 1980s, some of us might find it really hard to believe, 1980s was already a period where you have first documents shown a sort of understanding of culture as part of the economy. So what the Chinese later called 文化产业, so it's like cultural industries, was a notion that you can find in hundreds of documents from 1990s until today. So this was a very early constatation that, you know, culture is a very important part of the economy.
While in Europe, we understand that in 2006, I believe, Dorota, maybe you can correct me, when Philip Kern just tried to encourage European Commission and European Union to understand the concept.
It was in 2006, but he gave data from 2003. And still, I think that those 20 years ago report...
not too much has changed, that's true.
Understanding of culture, not as a poor relative, asking and begging for public funding, but being a strong economic player. What is quite interesting is that the name of the Ministry of Culture in China is Ministry of Culture and Tourism. This is quite innovative way of naming ministries. So you, Tamara, mentioned tourism here, but here having this kind of name of the ministry is a sort of underlining the linkages between culture and economic values. In this way, on contrary, I still can't forget that in between aims of cultural policies, we can find moral issues that for the morality of the society, cultural policy should take care. Cultural policy actions should take care. So this is something that which can let me to think about cultural policies in China as really patchwork on sometimes extremely surprising pieces, which are not fitting into each other very easy, in a very easy way for us to understand. About the name of the Ministry of Culture, for example, we are having Ministry of Culture and National Heritage and Cultural Heritage in Poland. At the same time, the name of ministry, which used to be named Department of National Heritage in Britain, was changed into the Ministry of Arts, Media and Sport, which was this direction where the importance of culture in the economy of country was underlined. So this is how to say, once more, I would like to underline that the situation which is in China is very unique, but is not so unique, speaking about cultural policies in different countries. Here we have some figures, very hard to achieve those figures and to compare them on public expenditure on culture in the central and at the central and local levels in 2021. And what we are having here is a huge decentralization. And this decentralization is really appealing. And I would like Marcin also to say some words about it, because he was the one who found those data, and I was enthusiastic about it and was waiting for a story in which we can say that local governments are really having power, real power on deciding how the cultural policies should be designed. And then I started to feel more skeptical. And could you comment on it, Marcin?
Yeah, well, actually, this doesn't come as a surprise to people interested in governance of China, that the popular concept of China being a centralized state is false. So China is very much decentralized. So you have the general directives coming from the center, from the capital, and then you have interpretations on the local level. And in culture, it's very similar. So you have directives, you have some of the programs, but you have most of the financing, almost all of the financing of cultural policies at the local level. But this is also because of the tax system that the local, provincial, municipal government, they collect taxes and they, of course, fund cultural initiatives from these. So basically at the central level, you have general guidelines and expectations that local governments will think of ways to meet the expectations of the central government. And then when Dorota, you showed the organigram, it really shows very clearly that the party controls all levels of governance. So the control is also in terms of the content of whether this understanding of a policy at a local level meets or not the expectations of either the central propaganda department or other parts of the party. So I think this level of financing is very much in line with this type of thinking. So it's the local governments that need to produce effects, and it's the central government that assesses whether these effects meet the general expectations. Not very detailed, just very, very general.
Thank you for this. And I must say that I'm thinking about this density of structures, Communist Party structures at local levels. But I think that, in fact, it was more or less the same during the communist time in Poland. That nearly at all levels we had party as a deciding voice, and then we have those who had to implement the information and instructions coming from the not only central committee but also from the local departments. Here we have also quite interesting information about not very big total expenditure in euros, especially. I think that it's a little bit too soon for us to judge and to say, oh, it's too much, it's too less, or it's very tiny budget, or the public spendings are not at the decent level. I think that we need more recognition and more analysis at this point. But in fact, it is quite, on the first sight, it's quite surprising, especially if we compare it with the huge number of cultural organizations and cultural institutions which we are having in this country. Of course, the country is huge, so we can't say that we can compare it in a nice way with a country like I don't know, typical European country. It could be something extremely amazing to have 5,772 museums, for example. At the same time, we are having here now around 600 in Poland at the same time. But here, looking at the number, I think that it is quite it is alarming that possibly the level of this public spending is not so high. But at the same time, maybe the incentives, and maybe not incentives, it is too nice to call it incentives, but the press on them to make profit on the market is as a supplementary funding is very harsh.
If I may add here, we had quite a big problem in trying to find separate data for public and private organizations.
That's right.
And this is why we decided to put them all together, because it's so difficult in China to decide, what is the, criteria for selecting something as a private or public entity. As we soon discovered, many of the entities that function as private companies are in fact public or are publicly owned and controlled. So it's a very complicated picture also.
I will show the previous slide once more.
Yes, when you said museums, there are many private museums in China. But then, you know, if you dig in, sometimes it's really difficult to say whether you still consider it public or private. And this is why the data is put together.
Yes, I do remember that I was really impossible for you, because I was asking all the time, well, how do they interpret, how do they define cultural public institutions? What is the definition of non-profit institution? And there is chaos here. For sure, there are, according to me, some misusing of non-profit organization or non-profit institution. Maybe not misusing, but different understanding of non-profit organizations. According to the commonly understood way, to the definitions which are approved worldwide, we understand non-profit organization as a private entity fulfilling public tasks, achieving public tasks. So on one hand, we are having private sector, but with this aim of public aims, and here of goals. It is not a case in China, so it was quite hard for us to understand. But even more difficult is understanding sometimes private entities working in the typically profit-oriented creative sectors, being in fact publicly owned. So this is quite a problem also. The next slide showing us something which is quite still important to understand, that the issue of censorship as integral part of the production and presentation process of cultural projects in China is still a fact, and censorship is overwhelming. We have here censorship and restrictions in different contexts of moral life, not only of cultural context, which comes many times to something which is extremely dangerous, which I call self-censorship, because it really stops people to be creative and artistically free. Because otherwise, when the content you create is under the threat of censorship, and you are in a way try to play with censor, and you are in a way trying to still to be creative and to hit sometimes some contexts, it is still quite healthy. But if a situation looks like that you are implementing or introducing self-censorship on what you are producing and creating, it is really very dangerous. Now, I think that I would like to ask Tamara to take floor to tell about cultural participation and consumption. She had interesting discoveries in her research, and please, Tamara, share with us what you discovered.
Sure. I will try to be as brief as possible, as I see that we are running out of time, which is surprising.
Goodness, it's too long. I'm sorry for this.
No worries. That was very interesting for us also to see the summary of our work from previous months. So in terms of cultural participation and consumption, if we look at data regarding household expenditures in culture, it's very hard to find them because the National Bureau of Statistics of the Republic of China is not sharing them with us, which makes it almost impossible to find anywhere else. So if they are showcased together with education as well as leisure. And if we follow the European example, we can easily guess that culture probably will be the small percentage of those expenditures. So that was the very first thing that we discovered, that it's very hard to find the data. And if they are scattered, or they are not very relevant, as we must guess how big is the percentage devoted to culture. In terms of participation itself, though, what was very interesting for us also is that there was no national research on the cultural participation in China yet. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, in 2015, there was a smaller research conducted by Wuhan University when cultural participation was studied in 13 different cities all along the country. And from this study, what we've learned was interesting as well, as we've learned that education, primary, but also to some extent income, they have the biggest influence on increasing or decreasing the cultural participation, which means that it's very similar to high-income European countries. Also, what we've learned was that in middle-sized cities, this cultural participation decreased, which means that at the end, it shows us the U letter picture, which is very unique in terms of any other countries that we know about. So here we have a very short summary about annual per capita expenditures or private households, again, on culture, education, and leisure in China. The figures are not very high as well. So they're barely comparable to Western European countries, rather on the level of maybe Eastern European ones, which still put us into position that we are guessing how much is spent on culture and how much on leisure and education. So relatively, that's a bit confusing, and we are still missing those data, which really doesn't make the building the picture of cultural landscape easier. So in terms of participation and consumption, I guess that's for now. Again, we encourage you to read the full paper, as we are spending a bit more lines on that, and the results are really interesting. Still, what was very important as well, although thousands of people were interviewed, the research itself wasn't representative for China. We should keep in mind that we are talking all the time about very different scale. And I guess that one of the main discoveries from this process, for me at least, will be that it's better not to assume anything when you start researching China. And like Dorota mentioned previously, she's not a sinologist, me neither. So for me especially, it was interesting to compare what I know from my previous experiences in Europe to what is happening in China. And it's very hard to compare those two situations, those two landscapes and pictures.
Amara, would you mind if you jump from international cooperation, because I think it would be fantastic if Marcin could tell us about international cooperation, to copyright or intellectual property protection, because I think that this is your topic of expertise.
Thank you. I'm not sure if a topic of expertise, but definitely that's something that I'm probably the most aware about, and what I've studied a lot, because it influenced the way that artists can perform abroad. So if we think even export-wise, and that would be probably the field of my expertise, how the intellectual property is protected, it's the main thing that artists are really looking into, understanding that for them, it means that either they will be well represented or not. So I won't surprise you probably saying that a major challenge to copyright competence, but also protection in China, is extremely high level of piracy. Although it's recently changing, and that we should absolutely admit that after 2015, when there was a very interesting campaign or action, let's call it that way, organized, which was actually dedicated to lower the level of piracy. Still, almost 70% of consumers, music consumers, cultural consumers in China admit that previous month they download music or videos from not authorized resources, not authorized websites, which means that that really puts China into position where it's very hard to develop this part of the market. What is also very interesting is that if we compare the concept of intellectual property and copyrights, in Europe, all our CMOs, so collecting management organization, they're operating usually more than 100 years, like in case of Poland or France or Great Britain. So accordingly, PRS, SACEM, and Sykes. In China, the concept itself is quite young. So they developed and they established their copyright protection law in 1992. And the newest actualization of this regulation, that it was implemented in 2021. So basically the concept itself is new. And although the piracy probably would be the biggest obstacle, still, like I'm saying, that's important that they put a lot of effort to change
what
the
I would
landscape.
like to ask you is what is the latest, what are the latest actions
challenges
about AI and about the issue of digital
well, actually, China itself didn't implement any new solutions on that, but we all know that we are facing the moment where we must figure out how we will deal with AI, with metaverse, and all others new fields of exploitation, as none of our collecting management organization was prepared for that. So we believe that in nearest future, China won't change too much in their law. It's very similar to the US model. And it's quite well operating, but still we know that ahead of us there are big challenges connected to new technologies, and we all must face them, especially that if we look at China from the digital point of view, the market itself is huge. So everything almost is connected to that. And what is really important, and I would really like to underline that all those actions that China government took in order to lower the level of piracy brought China to the 6th position in terms of the size of the music market worldwide. So that's really a lot. From 2015, they really managed to bring the market to the level where people are interested in it. They really want to deal with China. They want to find new options for collaboration. They're very interested in trying to reach out to audience, but also build their own companies. And we see it especially in terms of how the major music companies, major labels, Universal, Warner, as well as Sony Music, how they invest in China market. And they are growing. They are definitely growing, which is a very clear sign for us that things are changing within this market, and that potentially it will be the place that people want to go. Definitely, we see that plenty of musicians, they are very interested in China market because of its size, but they're facing great obstacle, which will be the Great Firewall, as we probably didn't mention yet. But to understand how difficult it is to be present online in China when you are not from China, not having China bank account, not having China phone number, I guess that Marcin could elaborate more on that. But what I've learned from musicians who really try to work there, it's very hard to keep the pace as well. As in China, social media, they're huge. We all know TikTok, which is a Chinese development, and we see how much effort we must put into making sure that we are up to date. So for artists who are expected to be present almost all the time, who are expected to be more present in terms not only of their art or of their creation, but also in terms of their lifestyle, it's very hard to keep the pace that Chinese are expecting. So I would say that there's plenty of opportunities there, and we see them. We definitely see that the size of the market, the hunger also how European music is becoming interesting for Chinese people as well, and how much space still there is on this market. Definitely it's worth trying, but it requires a lot of work. So at the same time, again, duality, it's advantage and disadvantage.
Thank you, fantastic. And now I would like to ask Marcin to say a word about international cooperation and to go to the conclusions. Sorry for being so long and to take too much time.
Thank you, Dorota. Yes, I would just like to wrap up and maybe just say just a few sentences. I think the international cooperation topic is covered much more than the topics of cultural creative sector that we spent most of our time discussing today. I think that's a really interesting case. Now, for the way or the place where China is now after the pandemic, of course, it's a very challenging place, even more challenges than before at many levels. Now, those people who follow Chinese policies and international environment, international relations of China, it will be very easy for you to relate all these things because, first of all, China has huge ambitions of being very much present as far as Chinese narratives are concerned on the international market. On the other hand, we talked about censorship. We talked about how difficult it is to be present on the Chinese market, but also how difficult it is in financial and economic terms. Very competitive, very huge entry barrier. You need to invest a lot. Tamara just said about this, time and effort. So, and then you have the worsening international environment as far as the sort of Chinese place is concerned. So first of all, you have the Chinese-US clash, very high tensions that negatively influence sort of Chinese place on the international cultural market. And then you have something which is linked to it, which is the sort of suffering or worsening of Chinese image around the world, which is not helpful. And of course, COVID-19 pandemic, which made it very difficult for many cultural players to be on the market. We know that the Chinese economy is facing a lot of other issues and challenges. So from the purely sort of economical point of view, it's also a very big challenge for many of the players who had quite a comfortable life on the market before. And the thing that we did not really touch upon today is the thing which is quite important, which is the regulatory framework. Now, the last few years, especially since 2018, saw very big regulatory push. And again, in other areas, we've been seeing this a lot. So new laws, new regulations being introduced to regulate the field as far as possible. So of course, it makes things easier for the party. It makes the sector more efficient, but it's also another challenge on top of all the things that we talked about. So lots of things that we have not touched upon. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about it in some future context. Now, apart from what Tamara said about the social media, I would like to also remind everyone that we have also a very good website of China Horizons, where we put all our outputs. So all the texts, all the videos, all the podcasts, everything, you can find it there from all the work packages. So this is a good place to have a look at what we're doing as part of this project. Okay, I think it's time for us to wrap up. So I'd like to thank you very much. So here we had Professor Dorota Ilczuk, head of the Creative Economy Research Center at SWPS, and Tamara Kamińska, PhD candidate at the university, but also, most of all, Director of Music Export Poland, who's been sharing with us her experiences also with working in with the Chinese music market. And I'm Marcin Jacobi, and I'm
my dean.
I'm dean as well. Thank you. And I head the Asian Civilization Research Center here at SWPS University. Thank you for watching us, and I hope you can visit the website chinahorizons.eu. Thank you very much.